In this tutorial, what I want to do is cover the process of entering information about the buyer's side of the transaction. And please keep in mind that you can start these forms. In our particular case, I'm having you do the listing side and the buyer's side, or you want to call it the seller's side and the buyer's side. But in many transactions, you might be showing property to somebody, taking them around, showing them property, and they say, okay, I want to buy this property you just showed me, and you're going to go ahead, you as the agent are going to start the transaction and fill it out on the buyer's side and not the seller's side. Okay, now before we get started, what I want to do is just to show you under the forms, under the form called the residential listing or purchase agreement, or it's called, we'll see here, it's called the residential, hold on one second here. It's called the California Residential Purchase Agreement and Joint Escrow Instructions. And so you see we don't really have a lot of information here. We have the information that came from when we put it in about the individual property, the listing side, but we don't have things down here about the kind of loan that the buyer is going to obtain or anything along that, any other kind of additional financing terms or inspections. None of that is in here right now because we just haven't put it in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up here and pull up the cover sheet, and I'm going to move this little thing out of the way and scroll down here past the seller's information, the property information, and I'm going to go down here to the purchase price. Now remember, when anybody gets ready to sell a piece of property, they normally are going to ask more than what they may be willing to accept. So in this case, if the people want to sell it for $450,000, they may be actually willing to accept something less than that, unless the market is really a seller's market where buyers just are having a difficult time finding a house. In most cases, what's going to happen is they'll price it a little bit higher, and then the buyer will usually come in with a price a little bit lower, and then they'll negotiate a final price. So in this case, we'll just say that the buyer is willing to put initial offer of $425,000. Next thing is that we're going to have a date that the purchase agreement is going to be signed. So they listed it in February. We're going to say that they're going to actually start making an offer on this thing about a month later on March 5th. The closing date. Closing dates become important because what you're doing is you're telling the seller, okay, I want to completely finish all of the things that are necessary for the transaction and close this transaction out and move into the new home. This becomes an extremely critical date. So in our particular case, if it's March 5th is when they're making the offer, we know that they're probably going to need some more time. So we'll go to somewhere in the form of, say, April, and we'll say we'll give them to April 25th to close out this entire transaction. A lot of times agents will say 30 days, some will say 45 days. Your starting point really depends upon the situation. Is it going to be an FHA, VA, CalVet loan? Are there a lot of inspections that have to be done? What's the situation? But this is a critical date though, the closing date. Next thing is the amount of deposit. Amount of deposit is a good faith estimate. So most of the time people are putting up somewhere, let's say about so many percent. In this particular case, we'll say that they're going to go ahead and put in 10,000. They're going to bind it with 10,000. Now the next thing is that if they're going to negotiate and say, for example, they're going to say, okay, once I, in the transaction, something like once I look at the termite report and see that it's good, I'll move forward. In other words, we can have increments of increasing the deposit based on certain events happening. So that's why we have the first deposit, the second deposit, the third deposit. In a lot of cases, if the buyer wants something and they're, let's say, kind of demanding, and they say, I'm willing to buy the house, but that pool inspection's got to be done, and maybe that's something that's going to take a lot of time and effort to get done. And then the seller says, okay, but as soon as I get that done, you're going to have to show that you are in good faith negotiating. I want you to put another $5,000 down. So that's what that means. This is going to be the date of the offer, okay, which we said was, we'll make it the same date as the date above. So we'll say this is going to be the date of the offer, we'll make this the 5th. Okay. This date here, the expiration date, is the date in which we want the people, let me move this up here a little bit, this is the date that the people are planning. Let me see here, we'll move this down a little bit, move this, okay. This is the date that we're saying that our offer is going to expire. In other words, when we put the offer out, if the people don't make a move on it, then at the end of that period of time the offer expires. Normally, in most situations, it's usually about 48 or 72 hours, which would be 2 days ahead or 3 days ahead. So I'm going to put in here March, okay, and if we had it the 5th, 6th, 7th, I'm going to make it the 8th, March 8th. And I'm going to say expire time is going to be, just say 12, okay, and it's going to be PM, okay, and we're going to put in, okay, and that's 12 p.m. In other words, by that time, if we don't get it back in writing that they've accepted the offer, then the offer goes away. The next thing is this is the offer acceptance date. Once the offer's been accepted, then we would put that in here. So if the offer was accepted, say for example on March 8th, we would put that in here. So it would be March, and we would say it was accepted on March, let's say 8th. The next thing that we're going to put on here is the total amount that's going to be financed. So what's going to happen is if the people are buying it for $425 and they're going to finance the property, okay, let's just say for example they're going to get it for $425, and let's say that they're going to come in with $300,000, so that means that they're going to finance $300,000. Okay, so we'll put, meaning that they're going to come in with a total down payment when they're all said and done of $125,000. So 3, 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Then we check that this is a residential property, year built. Year built you can get from the property profile or from the title company. So we'll just say that this happens to be the year that it was built was 1978. Okay. And a couple other pieces of information here that you can get from the lot number would be like lot 76, unit number, block number, subdivision. All of this you could get right directly off of the property profile. If it's a mobile home, then this would be the date. Mobile home serial number is what would go in here. Okay, so again, this gives you a rough idea of the information that we would be putting in on the buyer's side. Now let's just take a look at the residential purchase agreement and see what happened. Notice that when I click on the button, it saves the changes and it pulls it up. So now we have in here, we have the dates such as the close of escrow, the amount of money, which we didn't have before. Okay. We have the amount that's going to be $10,000. Okay. Right now we haven't checked whether it's going to be an FHA, VA, or CalVet loan, or I'm sorry, FHA or VA loan, or assume the loan, but they're going to get a loan of $300,000. Okay. This is going to show the balance of the down payment at closing. Okay. And again, the initials are here. Okay. And then you can see all sorts of other types of inspections that need to be done, and then these are filled out on that form. Okay, so we've got that. Let's go back to the overall cover sheet, and we will scroll down here, and transaction cover sheet, we have this amount of money. This is the buyer's information. So now you see that everything has been saved back and forth. When we come back, what I'm going to do is put in some of this other information that's in here. For example, the escrow company, the selling broker's name, the listing broker's name, the lender's information, the appraisal information, title information. And we're just going to talk about this. We're not actually going to take the time to for me to show you putting all of this in and watching me type, but I'll just go in here and cover what goes into the rest of this portion of the form in the next series of video tutorials.